Hey, John, would you like to
Sure. So
get us started?
yeah, so we've been through all but the State Workforce Development Board, and so Tori, do you want to testify on this?
Sure,
or-
I can. Do I need to go sit up there?
It's your prerogative,
Okay.
wherever you want to sit.
If I can see everyone.
That's the hot seat.
I know,
Now we get to grill you.
I know. I've never done one of these before, so I don't know how it starts off. If you want me to talk about it or you ask questions first.
Yeah, no, just, give us a brief review, and then, what your recommendation would be with respect to whether you want to keep it or repeal it.
Okay.
Or make,
Or
or
make
if there are any
changes.
statutory changes that are needed to actually reflect what it does now as opposed to when it might have been.
Gotcha. So just a little bit of background. The State Workforce Development Board, as I'm sure you all know, is kind of it's a federally required board based on the WIOA statute established under the Obama administration. And the central task of the board was to create a one-stop system for all workforce development activities going on in the state so we can have a more coordinated approach, because as I'm sure you can imagine, it can be easy to get pretty siloed with training or with job placement or recruitment and whatnot. So the whole point of it was to create a kind of a coordinated approach. As you can imagine, like many boards throughout the pandemic, it really kind of fell to the wayside for a while. Deputy Commissioner Dustin Degree was the former executive director. He moved on to the Department of Labor to help out during the pandemic again with their influx in inquiries. So the board really was relatively inactive for a large period during 2020, and which is why the governor appointed me to kind of come back, take over, restart the board. So obviously, again, we had a small hiatus, but we've begun meeting again. We're working with our federal partners to get back in compliance. And have been having meetings. We have another one coming up this Friday. And so it's a mix of members, very active. People are obviously very interested and engaged in this conversation. I think it's more topical than ever. But the board is continuing now to get back on track, even though we're not fully where we need to be in terms of a federal perspective. So there's three big things that we need to provide to the federal government to be in compliance. The first is an MOU IFA, infrastructure funding agreement, signed by all of the required partners coming together to decide how they're paying for the one-stop operator. We've currently begun negotiations for that. So we'll have 3 meetings planned, and we hope to be done with those negotiations by February 15th at the latest, and have something signed into the federal government by then. Upon the signature of that, we'll put out an RFP for the one-stop operator, which is currently the Department of Labor. It's unclear whether they're gonna apply to be a one-stop operator again, but we'll put it out there. And that's basically just for an entity or a single person to operate and manage the system and make sure that everything's working together, referrals are moving together, and that it's a little bit more of a seamless process, which is something we're going to try to create a couple more parameters for what we're looking for moving forward. And then the final thing is the statewide planning, which that doesn't happen until next spring. So we have a little bit of time to get that started, but all those things need to be overseen by the board. So that's kind of like the basic of the board, but the real intention of it, I think from a Vermont perspective, is actually coordinating, bringing stakeholders together and having real conversations. And I think the one thing that I think is wrong with the board, and if there's something we can't fully fix because part of it's federal, is how large it is. We've added a new number of members in the Vermont statute to the size of the board. I think it would be better served if it's just a little bit smaller. Like for example, at our last meeting, we had 74 people in attendance. So it's really hard it was online. Don't worry, there was no COVID spreading, but it's one of those things where it's very hard for you to have meaningful conversations when you have that many people in the room. Whereas maybe even if you don't shrink the size, maybe we have some more clear subcommittees where they're more focused, where they have some type of report they need to put out or something that's very specific. So it's not just like 74 people are required to come together every 6 months to meet about workforce and then just generally talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the things I'm doing unofficially instead of without statute is we're trying to convene smaller groups within the meeting, have them report out, try to do breakout sessions in the next meetings. But that's really kind of the one major problem I see with how the board is structured.
Welcome, Tori,
Thank you.
both as a member of this commission and witness. So, yeah, I was reading question number 6 or on the questionnaire, and you say that the board could be shrunk significantly. You talk a little bit about maybe, I don't want to call them subcommittees if that's not the right word. Do you have an ideal number in your head about what the membership should be? I sympathize with you. If you get 74 people together, I'm not sure you could get consensus on anything.
Yeah, I think the one like sticking point is it's basically like, so for every, it has to be 51% business owners on the board. So for every one, like say you add an ex officio position, we have to add another member, another business member. So it's basically like every time you add a member, you're adding 2. I think in a perfect world, we would have it so that it's basically just what the federal government requires. So we're just in compliance. I don't remember exactly what that number is off the top of my head because it would change with the number of business owners. But if we didn't do that, I think, having like regional subcommittees where it's like 5 or 6 people from, Bennington, Rutland County, and then you have people from Northeast Kingdom, and then you have people so that they can have like a very clear conversation, because I think when we're talking about attracting workers, engaging with workers, it's going to be both a sector approach and a regional approach. And I think those conversations aren't really able to be had when you've got like all of the programmatic officers and then all of the business owners. It's almost like we need to talk with the programmatic officers about implementation, what they're seeing on the ground, but then talk about the business owners and the community leaders about what they need and what they're going to do to attract more people. So I apologize. I haven't thought out specifically, I guess, exactly what I would like the committees to look like, but I think some form of a formal way to convene people in a smaller group might make more sense.
Okay, well said.
Yeah.
I need your help too in understanding the financial piece here. 282,000 was what you received in general funds, but it looks like you only spent 153,000. So is that a surplus of 127,000 roughly, or where did the remaining money go, or where is the remaining money?
So I apologize, just that I obviously just took over the board. I believe that does mean we have money left over because we didn't spend it all during the pandemic year.
All right.
But
All right.
that may need clarification, so I don't know.
Well, or does that mean that they got it over the last 5 years of general fund money? I'm curious.
Oh, okay. I took that to mean each year, but maybe that's not an annual appropriation.
Amanda, do you have more to add on that? I took that as an annual appropriation too.
Yeah.
Right, but
I believe, I'll check with our CFO, but I do believe that it is annual appropriation.
Okay.
so, I took it to mean that over the last 5+ years that that's a very good.
But you're fairly confident that there's money still in the cupboard, so to speak.
Yeah, like I'm confident we haven't
Yeah,
spent all the
all right.
money, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I just have to say, I agree with you about the size of the board and the fact that there could be smaller, more focused subgroups, even if you left the whole committee at that huge size. But I have to say that I'm really pleased that we're looking at the education and training piece kind of as a whole. A number of years ago, did a project for a company, a nonprofit, and it was one of their programs. It was providing training and potential employment for their residents. And I got a copy of the state WAYA, is that the way you pronounce it?
It's like, yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Whatever it is, and it's about this thick.
Yeah.
and it was incomprehensible.
Yeah,
And it was so confusing because there was, if you were 15 years old, you could apply here, but if you were 15 years old and a male, you could apply here. And if, I mean, there was no coordination
Yeah.
at all. And I just, it was a nightmare to try and figure out which of our residents would be eligible for which programs. And so I'm very happy that,
yeah, and that's one of the things we're working on with the negotiations for the MOU-IFA, is, common intake forms, no wrong door. So like, for example, you may call voc rehab thinking that's where you need to go, but they know exactly who you are supposed to be with. So that's one of the things that we're working on with that MOU,
Yeah.
technically, is so that it's not, because I mean, I think there's a ton of great workforce development stuff going on in state. It's just hard for it all to be connected when it's all in different places. So that's kind of one of the things that we're working on. One other thing I'll mention, and this is just kind of like a correction, I guess, to the legislation, is that we are supposed to be federally required to have staggered terms for members. And I don't believe it's specified in Vermont statute. So it just reverts back to I think it's like 2 years ending in February, the end of February. So we've made a bylaw change to make that so that we could do those appointments that way. But it doesn't need to be addressed this legislative session, but if there is changes being made to legislation, just adding that in would be helpful for us to be in compliance.
Well, that's a pretty easy change. So I mean,
I think we place to do it, wouldn't it?
yeah. And do you need to have specific statutory permission to create subcommittees, or can you just do that, do you think?
I can just do that. I'm able to just do that. So that's kind of what we're working on right now informally. But I don't know. I guess I need to probably take a better look at it and see what things we might need to require so that people feel some type of reason to be involved. Because it's like pretty informal right now.
Okay. So if you come up with something, that might be something that we could put into the statute so that they're officially recognized or
Right, on whatever.
authorized. Yeah.
Yeah, because that way also, I guess, we did pass a bylaw allowing people who aren't on the board to serve on committees. That way, it's like, if we were to shrink the size of the board, if, for example, like say you don't think that the president of UVM needs to be on the board, but he could be on the higher education subcommittee.
Right.
Then, it could be, it's a productive place for him to be instead of having a conversation with a random business owner. So just food for thought.
so
Also,
you said federal law has some guidance about the size of the board.
Yeah, and I can certainly pass that along. The board is meant to be large in size and a little bit convoluted just based on how the legislation is written. But yeah, there's like a basic number of people that need to be on the board based on the federal law.
Well, if you could provide us, that would be helpful, just so we understand what the minimum requirements are, because I mean, if 74 people are showing up for a meeting, I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful to figure out exactly what we're allowed to do, given the federal requirements.
So if you think about 74 people, and then the board members and stuff like that, I don't know whether that's separate or not, but even 74 people is half the size of the house. Can you imagine having with 74 different house members? I mean, you literally could not get, it's just, I mean, not that I.
Yes.
Not gonna
know that.
I mean, it could be- Or how about 2.5 Senates?
Well, that's why they have committees, right? So that's the whole.
Right,
the whole reason.
exactly. Exactly.
I'm all set.
So I do notice there are two legislative members
Mhm.
on it, Senator Clarkson and Representative Felino.
Mhm.
Do you think they would have any views with respect to shrinking the board?
I would guess, yes, they would. I would guess, yes, they would. Because again, also, we're supposed to have, but based on Vermont statute, we're supposed to have 2 members of the House and 2 members from the Senate. We only
Oh.
have 1. They've been vacant, which obviously they're fine to be filled if people want to fill them, but they just have been vacant. So I'm sure that, yeah, they would have thoughts on that. Because Allison Clarkson has been serving on the board for a very long time, so she would have a really good perspective on this. sure.
Right, and I know Representative Polino is very involved.
Yeah.
in
Yeah, very involved, yeah.
Workforce development.
Yeah.
So we have 2 empty seats and they've been empty for a while?
Yeah.
How long?
I don't know exactly. I would guess probably before the pandemic would they have been open.
Okay.
I know Allison has been on there for a long time, but I can't think of anybody else who was on there.
I believe Senator Sears was on it at one point,
Oh,
but that's the only other name that comes to mind right now.
okay.
And just, I sort of understand why it stopped meeting during the pandemic, but I mean, there were workforce development issues during the pandemic. I mean, still even during that period of time, there was, some businesses that were desperate to find employees. So, you know anything more about why it stopped meeting?
I think, I don't specifically know exactly, but what I could probably guess is that most of the workforce development activities they remained happening through the workforce development division of labor, but were not, broader discussions for the board meetings were not happening. And they also used to be in person, Capitol Plaza, they were pretty big. So I think the first reason was first initial ones is probably they didn't know how to transition to a meeting like we do now. And then I think with Deputy Commissioner Degree moving over, that's kind of when it went to the side for a minute.
So following up on that, do these meetings have to be in person?
No.
Because, one of the things I'm going to share with the commission this afternoon when I looked at per diems is Oregon's just passed a statute which requires that boards and commissions meet virtually unless the law specifically requires them to meet in a physical location. And I just worry, given the size of this board, that's a cost to the state.
Right.
That if it's unnecessary, we should not be bearing.
I do think it's unnecessary for the board to meet in person, especially when it's at large. I think, obviously it's useful to have committees, when it's safer, meet in person for sure. But I don't think it's necessary for us, especially, I don't think it's necessary for us to get 50 people in a room at any given time. It's also, I think, makes it easier for people to participate. Our attendance, I'm sure, has gone up because people can just log on from any area of the state and then join. So yeah, I don't believe that it's necessary for us to meet in person.
How long are the meetings traditional?
We usually do them from 9 to 11, so about 2 hours.
Conducive to a remote type of environment.
Yeah, and now with breakout sessions, so for our next meeting, we'll plan on breaking some of the required members into different groups to have smaller discussions. You can do that all through Microsoft Teams so that they don't have to leave the meeting. So there's not a need to convene in one place.
So I do imagine that most of these people don't take any per diem,
I don't think they're,
because I think that, I can't imagine that the president of UVM cares if he gets $50 to come to a meeting. So I can't imagine that most of these people.
Well, it's also more efficient to meet virtually. Just if you don't have to meet in person. And being from Southern Vermont, traipsing up to Montpelier all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, our chair is
It's a
from
burden.
Brattleboro, so it makes it a lot easier for him as well.
The president of UVM attend?
He hasn't attended since I've taken over, so I don't know.
Yes, is that?
Usually they send a proxy if it's someone.
Thank you.
I don't have any more.
I'm all set.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Now you can come back.
Right side of the table.
Any more questions on any of these? Okay,
Do we want to, should they be weighing in or not? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I don't know. Did you want to weigh in also, or did you trust Tori here.
Tori handled it well.
The answer.
I'm sorry, I guess,
But it's definitely in support of all the things.
I'll withdraw my,
Okay, so are we ready to start our discussion on the different ones?
I think so.
Okay, let's do it.
We want to start in the order we took these up, or?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one we took up was the Youth and Agriculture, Natural Resources and Food Production Course Consortium. And the testimony we heard that it never met.
So I move to repeal it.
In favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Okay. The next was the Department of Labor Advisory Council, and the testimony we heard was its last meeting was during the Douglas administration.
I move that be repealed as well.
Second.
in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Okay, so then we move on to the Labor Board Review Panel.
What number is that, John? Oh, 176.
Okay, one-
Labor Board Review.
that's the one that it sounded to me like it should be called the Labor Board Nominating Panel instead. They're the ones that nominate.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But I'm not gonna argue about a name change, but that's what that one was.
So I'll move that be maintained.
I'll second it for discussion. Not the one that you had some questions about as far as it was redundant or not.
I
Questions get answered.
guess I won't support this one. I just think it's a somewhat unnecessary step between the governor who makes the final decision, any governor, and applicants who are applying. So I guess I won't support this one and the retention of it, and we'll just take a normal vote, that's all.
I mean, there are several instances where there are nominating boards. I mean, I think it was either,
Judicial nominating,
judicial nominating,
Cannabis Control
Cannabis
Board,
Control Board.
well, the PUC is
Yeah.
judicial nominating.
So can I? Go ahead, you have.
Well, on one hand, I certainly get where Matt is coming from. It does seem to be kind of a redundant step. And I would say the judicial nominating board, you've got a lot more players involved in that, a lot more judges and things like that. So I could see the frequency being more often, where they only meet when you have a vacancy. And sorry, I think I missed it, that when a current member's term expires, does this board meet and recommend them again if they're looking to continue? So-
Yes, the expiring member, if they wish to seek another term, they resubmit an application to the nominating.
Okay, so they do it. But I do agree that it is a well-established process.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just for the record, Rob, the only time the Judicial Nominating Board meets is also when there's a vacancy. It isn't like they meet every week just to meet.
No, but I was. Don't we?
No, that's retention you're thinking of.
Yeah, I am
The re-
thinking retention.
Judicial
Just-
retention meets every year because
Right.
some judges are up for retention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nominating board only meets if there's a vacancy.
Thank you.
I will support this, maintaining this one. And one of my reasons is because I think that the Labor Relations Board is the board itself is a very important board. And I think having this one step, and this is no is no comment on our current governor or any other governor. But I think that this is one step, it removes it from the perception of any political politics playing any part of the appointments. And I think that the Labor Relations Board is a really important board in the state. And by having this, it has the perception anyway of removing politics. Because you could have, I mean, you're gonna have different governors at different times. And so that's why I'm supporting this.
Any other thoughts?
Tori, did you have some thoughts on this one?
No.
Okay,
Guess we're ready for a vote.
okay.
All right, all in favor in maintaining the Labor Relations Review Panel? All right,
Wait a minute. And those opposed?
those opposed? All right,
Come on, I want it on the record here. I worked that hard, at least I'm gonna vote.
sorry about that. All right, then we move on to the Passenger Tramway Board.
I move we keep it.
Second. Rob,
The only question I had is, I know it's still gonna go through the committee process. I would be curious to know what those in the industry really still think about it. And if the insurance requirements would come into play, do they rely on this board as far as the insurance industry, or does the board look for some input from the insurance industry? But I will support it.
just knowing how busy our agenda will be in House Government Operations this year, if we can reach out to the Ski Areas Association before our next meeting,
Just-
to try to get an answer to that question, I'd like to do that, then
I think that makes sense.
put this on us to take testimony in government operations.
And I'm totally fine with voting for this, and I will vote for it today. I'm just, maybe it's my own personal application. I'd just be curious to know. I just want to make sure that we're not building in redundancy.
Yep.
I have some concerns about other things that government's involved in.
Right, so we can just reach out to, I don't know who
Yeah,
is
there's a
the
Vermont,
Molly,
Molly,
who?
Molly Maher.
Okay,
I'm happy to do that on my own.
oh, okay,
okay.
Yeah.
Great.
No, I do.
and then bring,
Sure.
okay. Good,
Molly.
M-A-H-A-H, I think, or M-A-H-A-R.
Skiers Association.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. The next one is the
Well,
working,
we didn't technically vote.
do we want to vote or do we
Well-
want to table it?
no, I think we should.
No,
And then get,
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not looking to,
all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so then we move on to the working group on state workforce. Which I believe the testimony you heard from Amanda Wheeler was that it met once, delivered its report, and is no longer needed.
I move to repeal it.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so the last one is the State Workforce Development Board itself. Which we heard a couple of issues, staggered terms. Some thought about shrinking the size of the Workforce Development Board.
or at least
Or creating
making
committees.
sure that subcommittees are authorized so that they're seen as legal. I think that might be, because you can set up the subcommittees, but if there's resistance from people on the board or from people outside the board saying that they weren't legitimate.
Right.
Yeah, so we should check that out. And we can put that in the report if we need to.
And I can provide more information about the federal requirements as well as what, we're kind of envisioning the
Do
subcommittee.
you want to
like.
provide us with a recommendation at our
Yeah, I
next
can.
meeting?
Yeah, I
And
can.
because that'd be really helpful because, we'll be drafting the bill pretty quickly.
Yeah,
So I prefer. that we
Yeah, I
do.
can do a recommendation for next meeting.
Oh, that'd be
Great.
wonderful.
Yeah,
perfect.
definitely.
Well, I move we maintain that.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The two that we talked about.
Oh, yeah, we
that
should
have
discuss
little
those.
X's.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need to talk about because they have little X's under that federally required. The Occupational Safety and Health Review Board and the Employment Security Board.
Well, we-
Yeah.
And also, not to interrupt, number 171, which is the State Apprenticeship Council, is also federally required. We didn't talk about it at all, but we probably ought to at least weigh in on it.
But it's federally required.
Yeah, so did you already make a motion?
I don't remember.
No, she did not.
So I'll recommend that numbers 171, 173, and 175 all be maintained. Want me to read what they are? No, okay.
Second. No, Baker will elaborate.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
That is it, I think.
No, we appreciate the testimony of those other boards and commissions, because now we will not have to review them at another meeting.
Right. Okay. So where are we on our agenda? I think we're ahead of ourselves.
We are way ahead of ourselves. It's
Um,
10:11, and the only issue we have left to discuss is per diem.
Okay,
So should we start the discussion now with an hour and 10 minutes? I don't know how much. And then if we need to conclude it, we can take maybe a little bit of time of the next meeting. And then we don't have to stick around for an hour.
yeah, I think we should start the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. It was great to meet both of you and have a nice rest of the day.
Yes, and watch the weather.
Bye-bye.
So I don't know how we want to frame this discussion, but I thought that what would make sense was for us to throw out
Yeah.
ideas about what we need to address when we're looking at the per diem. And, yeah, would you read the email that I sent you, just the email from Stephanie? I wrote to Stephanie Barrett and asked her if they had any idea what we were spending on per diems. And I believe that what she said here is, as far as she knows, this is what she sent me.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Stephanie Barrett?
Oh, Stephanie Barrett is the guru.
Oh, Jack, well, okay, I got it.
Joint fiscal.
Thank
Joint
you.
fiscal.
Yep, thank you.
And I think that what she said here is that as far as she knows, this is what the agencies, this comes from the governor's office.
I need to read it. It's very
Yeah.
quick. She says, I am not sure it is limited to just board and commissions. There may be other per diem payments, especially in AHS, but the rest of the agencies should mostly be served by board and commissions. Hopefully this helps your conversation a bit. And this was a quick pull from the state accounting system on per diem expenses.
Yes, so it's not a true, and then this doesn't include legislative
I was gonna
committees.
ask you that, okay.
And the way she said that we deal with the legislative committees is it's just the appropriations committees just approve it on a case-by-case basis, on a board basis. And it was just asking too much for her to go back into it, look at all the per diems. But this does give a sense of what we're spending now and if we, so I just thought it might be somewhat helpful.
I think it was very helpful.
It is.
Yes.
I'm actually astonished at how low it is.
Really.
I will say I've heard from the executive director for the VOSHA review board that they want us to increase per diems. I'm not saying in favor or not of that decision, but they, just given the nature of the work, like how much work the chair puts in and the expertise required, they were asking if we could increase that per diem. So that's the only thing I've heard from a board about that.
So my question, the basic question that I want to find out is, does it make sense for us to statutorily say, unless otherwise specified, all per diems are going to be $50 for non-legislative people? Or does it make sense for us to say to the agency of administration, if you have boards and commissions that need to have a per diem, when you submit your budget, put that in your budget and then figure out if they should be $50 or if they should be $175 or if they should be $300 a day. And let each agency, department, whatever, just make that decision within their own budget. And I don't remember if you remember the hassle we had last year when the Climate Council came to us and said, we have, and I don't think it got as far as the House, because I think we dealt with it in the Senate. They came to us and said, we have this budget for per diems, but we're only allowed to give $50 to people. Most of the people aren't taking the per diems because they're paid by somebody else. And we want to involve people who don't necessarily have the means to be able to participate for $50 a day. I mean, they were talking about, a farmer who had to give up a day on the farm. So they asked us if within their budget, they could determine a different scale than $50. And it just got into a wrestling match. And we decided that this was something that this committee should take up instead of doing it piecemeal by piecemeal. So that's why I'm wondering if it doesn't make sense for it to be allowed for people to make their own decisions depending on who they need to attract to come, and like with OSHA. So anyway, that's a real concern that I have, and why we can't do it that way instead of having.
That's interesting because, from my experience with boards and commissions, not all, I'm sure you know this, not all boards and commissions are created equal. Not all work put in is created equal. Some are more important than others in terms of us getting more diverse or just broader talent. So it might make more sense to not have it be a one size fits all approach in terms of the per diem conversation.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just a question that, and I don't know who would answer the question, because I don't know if we talk to agencies and departments, or I don't know how we find out the information to make a decision on this question. And there are other questions also that I think we can do.
So having done a little research on this.
Oh, good, thank you.
There are a couple of different models out there. And I just, given your discussion about the Climate Council and the fact that they wanted to pay more per diems to certain people, Oregon just in 2021 shifted away from a $30 a day per diem to one that was more based on allowing people who had lower income to participate at a higher per diem level. So if you have a income under $50,000, then you get the legislative per diem instead of the $30 per diem. Yeah,
But they based it on income.
right. So that's just,
You have to disclose your annual income.
yes, you would, as part of the nominations process, you would have to disclose your income. So it goes up from $30 a day to $151 a day.
So that's very interesting. And I was, one of the things that Tori mentioned is that, given kind of OSHA board, VOSHA, that, there's a lot of expertise that's required there. So this wouldn't cover that. I served on the community development board for 13 years, and we got a box about this big 4 times a year with applications, and it was really, really time consuming. And we didn't get any for that work. And then we got $50 a day for, I think at the time it might have been 30 or something, I don't remember, but so that wouldn't have been based on your income. It would have been based on the fact that it probably required a week and a half of work ahead of time. So
Washington State categorizes its boards into
Yep.
5 different classes.
I think Matt
Oh,
had a,
sorry.
Okay, so the first one you mentioned, just, I know we're gonna go through these in detail, but my natural reaction to that one is absolutely not, for a couple reasons. One, it may be more trouble, more administrative work to accomplish that than benefit. And the second thing is, when you start talking about disclosing salaries, that's a dangerous sort of path to go down. And I'm wondering if that in and of itself will restrict the kind of folks who will serve. So we talked about the president of UVM, his salary is probably well known. But let's say we were choosing the person, the head of Sugar Bush, and we wanted him to talk about safety. I don't think, maybe, but I have real concerns that somebody'd say, I gotta disclose my salary, my benefits.
Oh, you don't,
oh, no. If you wanted the per diem, I think is what they did.
yeah, it would be if you wanted to hire per diem, you would need to disclose your salary. If somebody is
Yeah.
earning over $50,000 a year, I don't think they have to disclose anything. It would be their choice.
Or if they're earning $24,000 a year and they don't need the per diem,
$50 and they don't have to do anything.
right?
I-
Or even if they're under 50, if they don't want to hire per diem.
Okay. All right.
And the way Oregon did it,
Yeah.
it was just a self-attestation form. So you
Yeah.
would attest personally, you don't have to file your income tax return. You just have to self-attest that you earn a certain
Yeah, but
income. level.
Okay,
can I just say one final thing and then I'll shut up on this one? We have an ethics board now. And let us just assume for a moment, I put down my salary is $50,000. And I want the larger per diem. You know, I'm not paying attention. I don't remember what my, income was last year, et cetera. And then someone later on says, that guy makes a ton more money than that. Okay, are we gonna have a situation where the ethics board is gonna be examining the amount of money that the person has disclosed?
They don't have the authority to do that at this point, unless there was a complaint.
Raise my concerns.
okay, but so that's one model.
Right.
What did Washington do?
Washington has a very interesting model. They classify their boards into commissions into 5 classes. They have one, which is any part-time board, which is just advisory in capacity. Those boards get no per diem and only expenses. Then they have, which I don't think would be applicable to Vermont, but they have agricultural commodity boards and commissions. They receive $100 per diem plus travel, plus expenses. Then they have boards and commissions that have rulemaking authority, perform quasi judicial functions, have responsibility for administration or policy direction of a state agency or program. They get $50 per diem. Then they have class 4, which is basically the same as class 3, except they not normally work in excess of 100 hours of meetings per year, and they receive $100 per diem. And then they have one which deals with the health professions and basically would be very simple, similar to the boards and advisory groups that OPR is responsible for that do licensing, but only in the health professions, and they receive a $250 per diem plus expenses. So that's just their model. I will say another thing that's interesting about Washington State is that they have in statute that all boards and commissions must use alternative methods to meet that do not require travel unless a physical meeting is required by law. Which is interesting. Instead of, as I understand Vermont, typically we meet in person. Twisting that around, especially coming from Southern Vermont would make it easier for people from Southern Vermont, the Northeast Kingdom to participate in many of these boards and commissions. But, Tori may, have some input on that too, because, does she struggle to find people from other parts of the state?
Yeah, we do. I actually think that I personally think of the move to remote meetings has helped our boards and commissions in terms of just getting people to sign on, especially when we are taking on farmers or people from the agricultural community, especially they're like, I don't want to leave my farm or whatever for an entire day to go travel, but I can leave it for a couple hours for a meeting or an hour for a meeting. So it's hard because my gut reaction is like, I really want to meet in person. Everyone should really meet in person. But I do think there's some value in being able to open it up to other areas of the state. Obviously that's a larger conversation about broadband access and making sure folks that don't have access have some way to meet. But I actually like that Washington model, not necessarily doing exactly like that, but I think we do have different categories of boards. There's some where they have a board meeting once a month for half an hour, or they meet every quarter for an hour. And those folks really don't care about a per diem or money, but the ones, again, like the VOSHA review board, where they're basically working every single week, making decisions about health and safety, we might want to consider paying that person a little bit more just so we get a high quality person to do it and not necessarily just someone who's retired. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just as a side. So I think different categories, I think we could create kind of our own for Vermont that are similar to that.
I like the idea of encouraging boards and commissions to meet remotely, but I don't like the idea of putting it in statute that they have to unless it specifically says they can meet in person.
Yeah.
I think that's, first of all, a little heavy-handed. And I think that that's for the board and commission or commission, whatever it is, to decide that this meeting is really important for everybody to be there, but these meetings aren't. And I would like us to not make it mandatory like they seem to have, but encourage instead. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, do you have any other examples from the national group or just those two states?
Oh, no, I have more.
Okay.
I was just going through.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. We should go through them first, I guess, before we start picking. Thank you.
No, and I was going to go to Maine next, which
Okay.
has very similar to Washington State, but much more simple. They basically have a division between substantive boards and advisory boards and have different per diems on both of those. I will say Maine is, and we've had this discussion in the legislature, does reimburse for childcare and personal expenses to its board and commission members.
It's also a very geographically challenged state.
Yep.
If you're from the southern part of the state and your meeting is in Caribou or wherever the heck it is, well, if I leave tomorrow, I can.
I'll be there next-
It is two different.
It is two states.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
And there are many people who feel they should be two states.
So Another interesting one is South Dakota, which actually requires the governor in each odd number fiscal year to have a separate schedule of boards and commissions and allows him to set the per diems, and then they're reviewed by the appropriations committees every 2 years. So it leaves up to the governor to do that, but then just has a legislative review through appropriations
So
every 2 years.
that is actually very similar to what I was talking about, is put it in the budget. Because it would be the governor's recommend in the budget, it would come from his or her agencies and departments. And am I reading that wrong? Is it similar?
I believe so.
Okay.
And Utah has a similar proposal, but it doesn't even go through the legislature. The director of finance, subject to the approval of the executive director, which I think is the same as our secretary of administration, just reviews per diems and sets them.
And is that true? How would that work for, well, we can talk about that later. I'm wondering about legislative committees.
And the only other unique or fairly unique one was Arizona, which has the state auditor review per diems and expenses of boards and commissions annually and report to the legislature.
Review or set?
Review.
Okay.
And make recommendations. Now, the reason for that is because in 2015, there was a problem with people in Arizona. Per diems could be charged for work, not just attending meetings. And there were at least 2 individuals who gathered quite big salaries. So my reading into what Arizona is doing is because of that issue in 2015, they did this auditor review process. Because people were making very large salaries for charging per diems for every day they indicated they worked.
Or thought about the issue.
Yeah.
Let's see, yesterday I thought about that.
And so those are really the only other models that I saw out there. I would say the typical per diem, I also just looked at per diems. The typical per diem is $50 per day. California has 100 per day. But, you know, most of that was, you know, Arizona has per diems that range from $30 to $300 a day. New Mexico is 95. Some have statutes with respect to certain boards and commissions where they set them all over the place. But the standard I saw was that most boards and commissions were set at close to $50. And the biggest exception I saw was parole boards. Parole boards typically had a higher per diem. And so, well, this was not a comprehensive review of boards and commissions. It was what I was able to find.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah. Well,
So before we get into all of those, can I just put a couple of items on for consideration as we have the discussion? And I just want to put these on so that they don't get lost. I mentioned last time that I believe the process to get reimbursed for per diem is a little outdated. And I urge us to consider a more rapid, a more up-to-date process. So I'll give you the example. I fill out my time sheet, here it is, another piece of paper, but I don't do that when I serve on the District 5 Environmental Board as a chair. I submit an electronic time sheet, gets submitted, et cetera. So there's a more rapid way of doing that if we choose to do it. I would also ask to consider direct deposit. There's nothing that bothers me more than getting a check nowadays. Now, I don't mind the check. I like to get checks, but it's just a pain in the neck. My Social Security gets direct deposited right in my account. My state pension goes right into my account. I don't have to play around with anything. And would hope that we might be able to urge a move to a more modern one. And then the last piece is they do provide electronic signatures now. So, if you need to have electronic signature, you can type it in and now my signature is there. I've signed for my thing. So that's the one item. Then I'll mention the other one. I don't want to do anything with regard to changes unless we've heard from the governor. I mean, I serve as one of their governor's representatives, and Tory's another one, but I want to be a little cautious as to how we proceed, that we make sure we're trying to work with the governor to get signed off on some of these changes. The amount of time that somebody serves on one of these boards, not that's not bad. The work that they do, how many hours they put in, I think is a factor. So today we're going to do 3 hours, but normally we do more than that. So if somebody's meeting for 2 hours in the morning, should they be compensated the same as we are going to be compensated? I just put it out there because, people do serve in different times, et cetera. I believe you mentioned the Zoom activity, and I think we should put the option there for boards and panels and commissions to meet by Zoom for a couple of reasons. One is weather, as we can see today. I gotta go 24 miles back to Stowe. You guys gotta go, I don't know how many miles. What is it? 70 miles?
110.
110.
123.
Okay, so you see my point. So if we chose to meet by Zoom, we would be, the weather wouldn't be an issue, mileage wouldn't be included. You don't have to worry about accidents. And then the last item that I'll mention regarding Zoom meetings is, let us assume I'm a young mother and I have a baby. And I'm in the meeting and the baby starts crying. I could shut off, my Zoom and go attend to my young baby, where here I am at the meeting. What am I going to do? Get in my car and say, oh, my baby's crying, I got to go home. So I think we should, to allow people to serve, I think we should seriously give them the option to do that. And that's it. Folks, I don't have any more.
Go ahead, Rob.
I guess I'd like to take even a step further back than that, and that's what's the intent of the per diem? In other words, are people serving on boards because they want to be a part of a larger process and have input? So therefore, the money really isn't a motivating force whatsoever. And I would say at $50 a day, it's probably not anyway. Or is the per diem meant to help cover some sort of expense that they're going to incur? Because the other part where I'm going with this is now all of a sudden I'm hearing that people are looking at per diems to cover somebody's lost wages for a given time or maybe for the day. So I think the first question for me, I'd like to sort of get a comfort level with this is just, what is the intent of the per diem? And then, because I have to say that I'm very inclined to agree with you, Madam Chair, as far as how that gets allocated and who makes the decision as to what it would be. That to me seems sort of more streamlined. And I think like Tori had said, and I've said it before, is all boards are created equal. Some are just more equal than others. And but I think the first question for me is what's the intent that we're looking to address here?
Brian.
Yes, thank you. Sure, Madam Chair. I agree with Jeanette's plan. I agree with Matt that I think it was Oregon plan, artificially, in my view, distinguishes different people from others. And I don't think that's a good idea at all. I mean, take the $50,000 mark, you could say 60, you could say 75, you could say 40, and it's very arbitrary. And I just,
You're talking in difference in income.
yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Oregon.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I didn't find much use in that at all. the Washington plan is too complicated in my view. It makes a mess of everything, I think. In terms of Matt's issues with pay, the remuneration, I agree with you completely. I don't see any benefit in filling out a paper form and submitting it. I think everything should be digital for whatever you're on. It's pretty easy to do. I don't even care about the electronic signature. If you're on the board and the board met, you get paid. That's just the way it is. And it should be deposited digitally too. But I think all of that can be accomplished if we take Senator White's suggestion that under the governor's recommended budget every year will be in whatever fashion the governor chooses to do. And I don't know whether it'll be at an agency level or a secretary level or a commissioner's level. It can go all the way down, I think, as granular as people want it to be. I mean, does the agency of agriculture know every single board and commission that might be coming out of that? Maybe, maybe not. But certainly the person that is responsible for that, whether that's at the commissioner level or whatever, they know about it. And they should be able, in my view, to decide whether they meet virtually or in person, what the per diem should be, whether the expenses are included or not. And it'll all be rolled up into the budget. So the governor in the end has total control about what's submitted to the legislature for approval through the appropriations committee. So I like your idea a lot. And that way we don't have to say it should be 50, it should be 60, it should be $70. We just say it can be whatever the corresponding authority determines it should be and just leave it at that. So all of that aside, are we going to make a recommendation in our bill about this, or is this just strictly for discussion purposes?
Well, at some point, we have to make a recommendation,
Okay.
whether it happens this year or next year. And my thought on this was that that if we had some idea of the direction we might be heading, that then it would give the administration and other legislators some time to kind of think about what that means. And then next summer, fall, whatever we want to call it, is when we would actually come up with a real recommendation. That is the way I was thinking of it in terms of timing, because I don't think that between now and our next meeting, we have enough time to make sure that we're getting it right. I think that if we did what you were talking about, then the governor and the agencies and departments would be able to, we don't have to set classes legislatively, or categories, that they would do that. The Department of OSHA Review Board, the Department of Labor knows how much time they put in. So they determine their budget. The 911 board, how do they, so each of those would know that we wouldn't have to do the categories. But anyway, so that was my thought in terms of the timing of how we would do it, is that we would just kind of come up with some general direction and maybe put something in the bill if we wanted to about continuing the discussion around per diems. And I don't know how to do that exactly, but that I don't think we have the appropriate information and time to make a real decision.
No, I think it gives all the agencies the ultimate flexibility in determining what suits their needs best. And the other thing I don't like is the way, and I don't know whether it was Washington or whatever state, the substantive boards. Maine, hex bells, who would want to be on a non-substantive board? You know, I mean, I'll volunteer for that. It doesn't mean anything and it doesn't get to do anything, but I'll on that. I just find that to be, again, artificially separating people. You don't need to.
Well, and wouldn't one of the side benefits of this be that it would put the agency in the position of having to take a look at every board?
Yeah.
And, like what we heard today, there was a few boards here that have just either never met or met once. And it would cause, I would suspect, an annual review. and probably wouldn't have these sheets grow like they have been, but, yeah, I still am looking, and I agree. When do we sunset this board here?
Next, at the end
Next
of
year,
next year.
So, as far as to push it out, I mean, it would be more legislative action, because I'm still trying to understand what's the intent of the per diem here? What are we trying to address for an issue?
Well, having worked for the federal government, you got your travel expenses, lodging and meals. Those per diems rarely covered the full cost of a hotel or your 3 meals a day. And so I could see this as being a little more money to cover your total expenses, on top of your various travel expenses. Because there are costs to trekking up here. So I think that could be one of it. I think the other issue is that, we don't regularly review per diems. So they haven't changed in a long, long time. And we've discovered in some cases, some people hadn't even updated to the per diems that are in section 1010. So I think, they aren't reviewed on a regular basis. And I think having them reviewed on a regular basis, so people are taking a look at the workload or the lack thereof of a board or commission would be important. Because, some of these boards do work really hard and some don't, but it's like, it's never reviewed. So why would it change? You have to put some impetus on someone to consider changing it.
So I think I disagree a little bit about the reason for the per diem is to help. My understanding was that when we, in the statutes, it says the per diem is your daily, that's your pay for the day. And then we reimburse for expenses. So if we are reimbursing 55 cents a mile, which I think is what it is now, something like that, that's supposed to cover the cost of and your lunch or your meal or whatever. So if we're truly reimbursing expenses, then I thought that the per diem was meant to just be a little kind of sweetener for people who might want to do it, but really can't. $50 a day isn't going to cover them not going to work for that day if they have to take time off from work. And we do $30 a day for jury duty. But people are supposed to get their salary from their workplace. I don't know what the real purpose was, but I suspect it was seen as some kind of an acknowledgement that people are giving up their time to do this and they need to have some bit of compensation.
And I'm not looking to complicate this discussion by any means, but I'm trying to figure out, okay, is this just a small token of thank you versus are we really looking to offset people's expenses? And then you get into that rabbit hole about, okay, if you had to take the day off from work and was uncompensated at work, are we looking to make that up? Or are we more like, say, with jury duty, it's more about the civic component of it? And
I think it's a balance. If the intent was to attract the best possible person for that board or commission, I don't see $50 as being a vehicle to do that. But
right.
I think most Vermonters who truly feel that service to the state is important would still be willing to serve on something as long as they got something back that more or less covered the inconvenience of not going to work or whatever the case may be. So, but that's even more of a reason, I think, why we could let the end result of what the per diem should be fall on the agencies and departments. They know best. If a board is going to spend 8 hours doing something, maybe that one gets elevated. And if it's just a 1 hour meeting once a month, maybe, it just there's gonna be variations, and I think,
Mhm.
I think we need to build some flexibility without making it overly complicated. And to me, your idea seemed like the best one, so.
I will say that last year, the discussion around the climate council was that people felt that it was necessary in some cases to give more of a per diem to attract people who simply couldn't give up a day. But their voice was important to be part of the discussion, whether that was because of their expertise or the fact that they ran a farm and so that they had input that was unique to whatever board it was they were serving on. So the conversation around that in the Senate, and it didn't get farther than that because it got taken out, but was that there was an acknowledgement that it was necessary to reimburse people at different rates for different reasons. But that we felt it shouldn't be done piecemeal. Is that,
Yeah.
am I remembering that right?
Yeah, it would have set a precedent
Yeah.
for pretty much everything being wide open then. Well, if they can do it, why can't we do it?
Right.
And
So, Tori, I mean, you're in charge of this process.
Right.
So, no, and I mean, just,
Put her on the
when you
spot.
talk to people, are there people that are concerned about the compensation or the lack thereof?
I would say by and large, no. I think most people don't really care about the per diem. They don't even know it exists until they get one. They really don't care. So, and maybe that's a conversation about, we could set a base level, like if we were gonna take Senator White's idea, take like a base level, maybe make it $30 instead of 50, like that's, just something. But then allow the state agencies to kind of make more decision. I think, because in my head, it's like, there's maybe a handful of boards where it's kind of like, okay, we might need to sweeten the deal a little bit more for these folks. And that's why I think about like the VOSHA review board. Cannabis control board is a little different because they're paid. But the parole board, that type of thing, maybe even some of the district commissions, I'm just kind of like, just thinking here, because like when they're hearing, if they're there hearing for, 7 or 8 hours on a bunch of different things, they probably deserve a little bit more than someone who just has one meeting a month. But I think for the most part, most boards doesn't really matter, but some very, very important boards, it matters a whole lot. So I kind of tend to like your idea where, the agencies and departments can kind of put together a budget and say, this board really puts in this much work all the time. They really deserve this much money per day. This board can stick at the base level, no matter what, they're going to get this amount of money.
Or it could not just be because of the amount of work that they do, but the decision might be, there are certain people or groups of people that we need to make sure their voices are heard on this particular issue. And so we need to compensate them.
Yeah, the parole board is a great example of that. I don't want to get too deep into this discussion, but there was not a member of color on the parole board. We took months and it delayed time trying to find someone. There was no way we could sweeten the time commitment for anyone. There was like a little bit of leeway being able to offer a little bit more, and maybe just across the board, not just one particular person, but just we might be able to attract different types of people to serve on things instead of the same 10 people that we appoint to every board.
Well, and would it be fair for me to say that for a lot of people, it's about the time commitment that you're asking me to make and when you're asking me to make that time commitment?
Right.
In other words, because of today and technology, maybe we don't need, I think maybe it was you as an example where instead of somebody setting aside the whole day to participate in a 2-hour meeting, they could participate in that 2-hour meeting from home,
Mm-hmm.
some other place. So again, I go back to, I'm not sure that per diem is the determining factor as much as the time commitment, what I'm committing to.
Matt?
So I want to just the $50 per diem. I go back to the farmer. So farming is not an affluent. You don't get into farming for money. You're never going to make any money. But, if you're a farmer and you're asked to serve, $50 is $50. It's, well, that's, 200 gallons of milk or, 2 acres of green beans or something, but it does make a difference for certain occupations. And, I know an individual who's works on a transportation, driving people around and stuff like that. $50 might make a difference for that particular occupation to serve. I was a state employee, $50 is peanuts. I mean, my salary was pretty high, so it didn't make that much of a difference. But for some occupations, and I think farming and transportation, it does make a difference. And then the second thing is, I like Jeanette's suggestion that we give a guideline or some recommendations about where we're headed as a commission, so that all the interested parties would have an opportunity next year. They would be forewarned that we're coming and here's what we're coming for. And I don't want to mean it that way. That sounded tight. Here's what we're considering. And if you have some input on those kinds of things, we're happy to hear them, but, so nobody can say later on, next year we make a recommendation, a tight recommendation. And somebody said, nobody said anything about it, just found out about it, that kind of thing. So if we put in there that, here's what we're considering, and we're gonna be taking testimony, et cetera, people are forewarned, and then we'll have an opportunity to, we won't be surprising people when we make recommendations next year.
What if we put something in the report? It wouldn't be in the bill itself,
Put in the report.
but put it in the report that one of the things we're looking at is the ability of agencies and departments to determine the per diems. And that we also are looking at how to streamline the whole process of claiming the per diems and that we are looking at encouraging virtual. I don't like the Washington thing where they mandated it, but encouraging people to use alternative means as much as possible. Put those in there. And then it's in the report. It's not in the bill because we haven't made any recommendations yet. But and that would kind of alert people. Does that make sense to do it that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rob?
Well, I recognize that we don't have a lot of time here, but my concern about that is if it's just in a report, how many reports have been done and they just get stuck up on a shelf and nothing goes anywhere, where this is going to go through the legislative process anyway. And if it becomes a recommendation in the bill, then people are going to weigh in. I mean, you can always take it out after, but I'm just.
You are right about, yeah, I mean, maybe we put in the bill that.
Well, I agree with Rob. I mean, there's so many
okay.
reports that get flung at the legislature that don't get read.
Okay.
It is sad. Whereas if you put the language in a bill, it will be read.
Okay, let's do it.
I mean, but we have to decide on that language.
What we're gonna do.
But I mean, and the question is whether we do it this year or next year. Because I do agree that, at least we have Tori here who, works on the process. But I do think we want to make sure we hear from the administration. Because
And this is kind of off the topic, but your role and responsibility here is kind of new, right, Tori, compared to your predecessor as far as having the direct oversight over boards and commissions?
Yes, it is.
And where I'm going with this is the Secretary of State's office has weighed in on this and it had expressed some concerns. I'm just wondering, is it valid to have a conversation that maybe that particular function no longer is there and it goes into the administration? But that's another discussion, I suppose.
But what are you talking about, the per diems here?
No, I'm talking about the actual administration of the boards and commissions and the database and all the other stuff that Tanya.
Yeah,
Tanya,
Tanya right, has weighed in on, and, the price tags that have been thrown around on that, and the reluctance from the Secretary of State's office to basically take this on.
Well, I think
Right.
that's I'm having a little bit of trouble here because that's a separate conversation than the per diems.
Absolutely.
We have that conversation too.
But I'm just trying to understand, this is a new position and a new person in that position, and, right.
Well, it's not a new position, I don't think. Is it a new position?
Oh, Jason,
Jason Malucci. did
Yeah.
it
Yes.
a long time.
Yeah, Jason
And
and Rachel
Rachel,
Feldman before that. Yeah, yeah.
But wasn't it sort of, the position had a different title, but this was an area of responsibility that they had.
Yeah, so Jason oversaw boards and commissions. Obviously, he did an incredible job. But again, it was not his direct. So it was basically Rachel Feldman was the director of boards and commissions and appointments and constituent services. When she left, no one really took over the actual role of director.
Right.
And if any of you know Jason, he was involved in every single part of the office in every single way. So he really, he did a great job, but it wasn't his sole focus. So
Yeah.
I've been tasked with kind of basically completely changing the system so that it's more effective, just because it's quite frankly long overdue for many administrations back. It's been a problem. So, obviously any changes we'd like to make here. I think the two most important factors in terms of understanding the whole system as per diems, how it's administered is the first is obviously AOA. They're going to want to be involved, the agency administration, just because, that's kind of their oversight. But also DHR, we've switched our boards and commissions management system to the same system that they use for state government employees for being employed. So I think that actually might make a more seamless step to do what Matt was talking about, which is like making the per diems a little bit easier, making it more streamlined. So they might be important part of the conversation because they could probably offer some insights about making it easier as well.
That's exactly my point, why I think we should do it in the bill, and I thinking that there may be some things in motion already that will help address some of the issues going forward.
yeah, I will say that I think that I'm not ready to make a decision about the administration of the and the keeping of the inventory and all that about where
That's fair.
that.
Yep.
Because I think we haven't had that discussion enough, and we need to have that with Tori and Tanya and the
Right.
whole, and how we go forward with that. I am ready to make a decision and a recommendation about the per diems, that we let it agency, or I don't know how we word it, but that they put it in their budget. And I
Well,
guess it's the
I would
South
be
Dakota.
concerned about it just being put in a budget and getting buried in a budget.
Well, why would we care if it's buried in a budget and do we as legislators care that the OSHA board is getting $50 a day or $150 a day? Or do we care that the labor relations board gets 125? I mean, do we care at that level, or do we want them to figure out? I don't know.
No,
Personally, I don't care.
I agree that they should figure it out. I'm just saying, what level of review should the legislature have?
Well, when it reviews the budget, I guess.
Yeah, but if it's buried in an overall agency budget and they
Right.
don't really focus on it, then it's not getting any review at all. And my only concern with respect to that is, I think there are certain boards of commissions where you want to have representation from, people who may be economically challenged to serve on a board or commission. And I would want to make sure that, there's been due consideration to that.
Yep, I see. Yeah. So you could require that be a line item in every budget. I mean, in every,
Their boards or their per diems.
their per diems and how they.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you could argue the, AHS, which has got a $1 billion budget. Plus, there's a lot of stuff in there that you're probably not going to necessarily see unless you go looking for it, right? But I do agree that I think it would put the folks that have some oversight to these boards in a position of making sure. And again, I don't think it's so much the money is what's expected of me and when is it expected of me to participate.
So one item, because I pushed on this a little bit, is the actual process by which people claim and sign for and receive per diem. And it sounded to me like Tori was saying, we should be chatting with, we should invite other folks in to tell us what, to describe for us how we might change the process sort of like immediately. I get the discussion of Jeanette's and John's, the bigger picture, like is, what is this? There's going to be a line at it, all that stuff, which I appreciate and I think we should do. But a separate little discussion is, independent of that, how are people going to get paid? And can we speed that up? Can we make it smoother? Can we make it faster? Because that's what we're about here. We're about getting rid of old boards, panels, and commissions that no longer exist. We're tightening up boards and literally that's what we're doing. And while we're working through the bigger picture of how per diem is handled by these things, can't we please get them paid faster, get them paid smoother, bring this process into the, into a different thing. So, and I think if a half an hour discussion from, I don't know, the treasurer's office or the Department of Human Resources or whatever, at least we let them know, hey, can you do something about this?
My guess is that I don't think I need to hear the details about how that happens. I think that if we suggest, it seems to me that that's the kind of a thing that is probably already in the works and being worked on. And it takes, and there's per diems that are paid through the agencies and the departments, and then there are legislative per diems and expenses. And they're two different systems. So that might be how they do it with the administration, with administrative appointees might be different than for example, right now, the treasurer's office is paying the teachers on the pension board. That's coming out of the treasurer's office. It's not coming out of the legislative per diem thing. So I don't know. I don't need to hear from people about the details of how we do it, but just to say, you need to work on getting this to happen. We used to get all our checks for the legislature on every other Thursday. We'd get a check. And we'd have to do it, and we'd do a little piece of paper with our expenses.
Oh, yeah,
And-
that's what I'm talking
Well,
about.
but it's changed. And my guess is that they're in the process of doing the same kind of thing. Probably a little bit harder because you probably have 2,000 or 3,000 people.
Matt, I can touch base with DHR about that. The only reason it would need to come before you all is if for some reason we'd have to pay more for, like, because, obviously everyone who's a state government employee, they're already in the system, and how we're working with DHR is that you, as a board or commission member, you apply as if you apply through, as if you're applying for another state government job. So I would guess, and I can just talk to the folks who run the tech for us, that it's possible to convert that into the same payment system. But the only reason it would need to come before you is if for some reason we have to upgrade the system or do something else for that to happen. And then that's a different conversation about, do we want to keep it the same or do we want it to change?
So now let me ask the question. Now I am confused. Who actually would be charged with changing the payment system for per diems, and who's going to do it? Who's got the responsibility? Who are you charging? Are we saying to the treasurer's office in our bill, here's what we want.
No, it isn't the treasurer's office.
Well, who actually are we charging to do that?
It depends.
Who, on what? I mean, in other words, I want to see it done. I think it's outdated. I think it's cumbersome, et cetera. So I got to turn to somebody and say, I want you to do this. Who's the somebody?
My guess is it depends on whether it's an administrative, whether it's one of these agencies that's doing it, or whether it's a legislative committee, because
I'm not on any of these.
no, you're
I'm
not.
not.
The four of us
But so-
get through ledge council, and that's how we get paid.
Oh, yes.
And me, and you do too.
Right.
It goes to ledge council.
But for example, for the Act 250 Commission, right, that's technically under the Natural Resources Board. So that would be something that came from the administration. So it just depends, because if it's a legislative board, it's coming obviously from the legislature. But, again, like I would guess SOS, they have their own specific board. So they probably have their own system as well. So it isn't all going to be the same. Obviously, the bulk of them are underneath the governor's office. So that's something that we have control over. So I think I'm the person you have to point at to say, you need to fix this. But regardless, I think, we can at least streamline our process to make it a little easier, or like just see what the capability we have is technologically.
Okay, here's my last statement on this one. 'Cause I don't want to belabor the point. Where I agree with you, I serve as the chair of the District 5 Environmental Commission. It's smoother, faster, easier, quicker, everything, with the exception of I get a check. I don't want a check.
Okay.
Or a deposit. So that I will point my finger at you at that and say, take care of it politely. How I want to point my finger at somebody else and say, here, I'm filling out this form, as many people are going to do. Okay, so all of these boards and panels, 260 of them, a lot of them are not getting compensated. They're people, average citizens who say, somebody says, go fill out an expense form, and they go, what does that mean? So how are we helping them to do it faster, smoother, easier? That's it, I'm done.
Well, I think the 260 that you're talking about are under Tory. And you just told her to do it. So.
No, got my assignment now. I'm good.
So by 5 o'clock this afternoon, you should be all set.
Calling to check and see if it's.
There are very few, I think, probably, there are not that many, I would guess, per diem, legislative, non-legislative per diems on legislative committees. I mean, there's you on this one, and I don't know if the waiting committee, for example, has any. Pension committee has,
Pension has some.
well,
they're
except
through the
that's through the
treasurer.
treasurer's office. That's not a
Council
legislative.
nominating this one.
Okay.
So I would say, I would,
Real small problem.
real small.
Okay, I get it. It's,
Yeah.
I'll take it.
It's mostly the administrative,
Okay, all right, thank you. Now that you've cleared that up.
yeah.
Unique in more than one way there.
Yeah. Thank you. I thank you for allowing me to.
But,
Yeah, that's okay.
but just to, we could ask like Mike Ferrant and say,
How-
for the few people who serve on legislative committees, why can't they, like we do, have access to the online expense,
Yeah.
platform and fill out their expenses that way?
Yeah,
Do you have access to an online?
But-
Yes.
yeah. We do all our stuff online.
It's just you, Matt. That's it. You're the only person getting paid by check.
But part of the administration
For employees.
system,
Yes,
that's through their HR system. It's not our own.
Right.
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 The other difference is we are employees. I mean, even though we don't like to call ourselves that.
Right.
We get.
We have an employee number.
That's right.
That's
So-
not bad.
But if
But
you
we-
were to get on it, it's very easy to do. It's very fast. I mean,
That's my point. Brian makes my point.
I realize that may be a Christmas gift. to you.
Yeah.
Although there are still some legislators who can't figure it
Yeah,
out.
that's, well,
Yeah, there
I don't
are.
want to comment on that.
Okay.
Primarily in the higher chamber though, isn't it?
So, huh?
Primarily in the higher
Higher
chamber though.
chamber.
No, I don't think so. In fact, if this were 2 years ago on Fridays in this room, there were 25 or 30 people every week that
Saying,
couldn't figure
"Oh
out
my
how to
God,
put their
what am I
expenses. And they'd have to call somebody from, Let's Council. to come over.
That's why the higher chamber only worked until noon on Fridays.
Anywhere house members.
We could check with Mike Veron and ask him
Makes sense.
what it would take for the few people that. Do we give them a guest sign in?
Gotta be away.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I'm not the tech person.
We can, I will ask.
Okay. So we're gonna do the report next week, right, at our next meeting? And a possible bill to come out of it. Do we want to try and figure out some language?
Well, yeah, we could. I mean,
Between,
it depends. I mean, I have the language from South Dakota, which has has it going to the appropriations committee.
so
As a
it's
separate-
proposed by the governor. and
Yeah,
the-
proposed by the governor.
And then it goes to the,
Yeah, and it's every other year in this case.
because
we could do it
they
every
might have a
year.
2-year budget.
Yeah, we could do it every year. I can send the language to Emma.
Lots of places have 2-year budgets. Okay, why don't you do that and we can review it next time?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
And this is going to be in the report as opposed to the bill,
No,
Well,
be in the bill.
in the bill.
Maybe in the bill.
Well,
We want to
that's-
get attention.
As we discuss, if we really want to have a discussion about it.
Yep.
That's how it will happen.
And it might be taken off, but at least it won't be ignored.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah. Okay,
Do we have any additional boards and commissions to look at next time?
Yes, on next week or on the 16th, we do.
Okay.
Um,
One other recommendation, on the 16th that we choose, if we're going to choose the last week we have available as a commission, can we make a determination if we actually want to use that in the last 2 weeks of the year? Or before you guys begin session?
yeah, we can have that conversation next week, is what you're saying. We could- Of whether we want it, yeah. Who do we have
I
now?
have down, we got a couple more for today, is that?
no, we do not have any more for today.
No, I had down the Texas Low Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission. I had written in
Oh, I did too, actually, Ron.
12-6. I mean, I'm okay with not doing it today.
211
So,
11 and
and
212.
212.
so next week we have the Council Advisory Committee, which is tied to the Criminal Justice Council.
What number, do you have a number on that? Or no?
Under the Criminal Justice Council.
Okay.
Um, It is 133.
No, go ahead.
We have witnesses invited to that. Then we have the Interagency Committee on Chemical Management, which is number 97. No, 96. Then we have the Interagency Committee on Chemical Management Citizen Advisory Panel, which is 97. Then we have the Natural Gas and Oil Resources Board, which is 99.
Oh, yeah.
And those right now are the ones that we have on our agenda for the 16th. Plus, we have Tanya Marshall from the Secretary of State's office coming in to testify or give us, just to be available for questions about the inventory we need to create. Because we haven't had a discussion about that for 2 years, and I think that's another thing that we need to accomplish before we are ourselves sunset.
Lori's gonna fix all that.
Yeah.
Well, she might, but I mean, we should, it would be good for her to hear what Tanya has to say because
Right.
Tanya's solution to maintaining an inventory was a very expensive proposition.
It was based on a system in Minnesota.
Okay,
You can probably find it somewhere.
okay, I'll do a little research.
Then then we would be reviewing draft legislation with Amarin.
I think that's enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
For next week, for the next, and
We
then,
got rid of 3 of them today.
Huh?
We got rid of 3 boards and panels today.
More than that. We looked at 8. I think we repealed 5.
8?
Well, maybe I'm wrong.
I'm gonna go home, so happy.
Good day.
Good day.
Less paperwork for me, so.
well, I
3 to 5.
have a
Thank you.
Zoom meeting at 12 that I have,
Great. Oh, great one.
The senator.
and
Well, we let
I guess I'm gonna be doing it in here. Because because the computers in the committee rooms don't have cameras. So Andrea said I should just use hers. So are we coming, huh?
Would you like me to motion to adjourn then?
Well, are we coming, do we need to come back this afternoon? I don't,
We don't.
okay, yeah.
Then I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
vote against it.
Going on a team.
I do need, as an oddball, I do need a signature on this.
Oh, give me that damn thing. I'll sign it.